What if the secret to growing thick, healthy roots from any cutting has been sitting in your kitchen the whole time, and nobody ever told you? Welcome back to Roots and Garden Secrets. I am really glad you are here today, because what I am about to share completely changed the way I approach growing new plants, and I believe it will do the same for you. Here is something I think a lot of you have experienced. You find a beautiful branch on one of your favorite plants. You make a clean cut, drop it into a glass of water, set it on the windowsill, and you wait. Then a few days later, you come back to find the stem has gone brown, soft, and slimy, sitting in murky water that smells like something you would rather not describe. That disappointment is something I know personally, and far too many good gardeners have blamed themselves for it. But here is what I want you to hear clearly today. It is not your fault. It has nothing to do with whether or not you have a green thumb. After more than 30 years of professional growing, I can tell you that the difference between a cutting that roots beautifully and one that rots overnight almost always comes down to a few simple things most people were simply never taught. Today I am walking you through the complete water propagation system that professional nurseries actually use, built around ingredients you already have at home, including one technique that 95% of gardening videos never even mention. Stay with me until the end, because I will also reveal a very common mistake about tap water that millions of American gardeners are making right now without realizing it. If this kind of honest, experience-backed knowledge is useful to you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Roots and Garden Secrets. Now let us get into it. So let us start at the very beginning, because before we talk about solutions, you need to understand exactly what is going wrong beneath the surface of that glass of water. When you cut a stem from its mother plant, that fresh open wound becomes an immediate target. Think about it this way. Imagine you had a cut on your hand and held it underwater in a warm glass for 3 or 4 days straight. It would not take long before that wound became infected and painful. The same biological reality applies to your cutting. That open tissue is an open door, and tap water, even clean-looking tap water, carries enough opportunistic bacteria and fungal spores to overwhelm a stem that no longer has its root system working to defend it. The cutting is already under enormous stress from being separated from its food and water supply. Its immune response is weakened, and in that vulnerable state, decay almost always wins. This is the part nobody talks about on those quick gardening videos you see online. The problem is not that you did something wrong. The problem is that plain water alone simply is not enough to carry a cutting through that critical first window. And that brings me to the first ingredient, one I guarantee you already have in your kitchen right now: raw honey. I know what some of you are thinking. Sugar water? That sounds like it would make things worse. But here is what changes your mind once you understand the science behind it. Raw honey is not just a sweetener. It is a living biological product that bees have spent millions of years perfecting. Inside raw honey, there is an enzyme called glucose oxidase. When that enzyme contacts moisture, it continuously generates tiny, carefully controlled amounts of hydrogen peroxide. Just enough to eliminate harmful bacteria on contact, without burning or damaging the sensitive plant tissue underneath. On top of that, raw honey contains a compound called methylglyoxal, a naturally stable antimicrobial agent that holds its protective power at room temperature without breaking down. Together, these two compounds wrap that open wound in a biological shield, keeping decay organisms out, while the cutting begins the slow, delicate work of forming new roots. But I need to make one thing absolutely clear. This only works with raw, unprocessed honey. The kind you find at a farmer's market, or labeled as raw and unfiltered in the natural foods section. If the honey has been pasteurized, those enzymes have been destroyed. The jar will still taste sweet, but for our purposes, it is completely useless. Here is exactly how I apply it. I dissolve half a teaspoon of raw honey into 1 liter of warm water, around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, stirring until fully combined. For particularly stubborn cuttings, I dip the freshly cut end directly into pure raw honey, hold it there for about 30 seconds, then transfer it immediately into the water. The key is not to let the honey dry on the cut surface. You want it working in a moist environment where those enzymes can activate. Let me share a story that really drives this home. My neighbor Margaret, who is 68 and one of the most passionate gardeners I know, had been trying to propagate her rubber tree, a Ficus elastica, for almost 2 years. 7 attempts, 7 failures. Every cutting turned to mush within days. The rubber tree is notorious for this. When you cut it, it bleeds a thick white sap, and that sap combined with bacteria in plain water creates the perfect environment for rot. After I showed Margaret the raw honey method, she tried once more. On day 12, she called me over to look at the glass. Small white bumps were forming at the cut end. Those are callus cells, the first sign that the cutting is building toward root production. By the end of week 3, she had a healthy cluster of roots that looked like something from a professional greenhouse. Now, a lot of gardeners reach for synthetic rooting powders, and I understand why. These products typically contain synthetic indole 3-butyric acid, and yes, they can work. But the margin for error is dangerously thin. Apply just a little too much, and you will chemically burn the tissue you are trying to save. The cutting dies faster than it would have in plain water. Raw honey cannot be overdosed. It works in harmony with the plant's own biology, rather than forcing a chemical reaction the plant has to manage on top of everything else it is already dealing with. Now that you understand the power of raw honey, I want to introduce you to the second natural ingredient in this system, one that works in a completely different way and takes things to an entirely new level. If you have an aloe vera plant growing somewhere in your home, and a lot of us do, I want you to look at it differently from this moment forward. That plant is not just a remedy for sunburns, it is one of the most sophisticated natural rooting agents that exists, and most gardeners have absolutely no idea. Here is what makes aloe vera gel so remarkable, and this goes much deeper than what most people have heard. There are actually 3 distinct groups of active compounds working together inside that clear gel. The first is salicylic acid, which triggers the plant's internal immune response and signals cells to begin dividing. The second is a mild natural auxin, a plant hormone that specifically encourages the cells at the leaf node to differentiate and become root cells. The third is a polysaccharide called acemannan, which forms a biological protective film over the cut surface, shielding it from pathogens in much the same way that honey does, but through an entirely different mechanism. Together, these 3 compounds essentially tell your cutting to stop waiting and start building. Here is how to get the most out of your aloe plant. Do not just grab any leaf. Choose the oldest, outermost leaves, growing closest to the base of the plant. Those leaves have had the longest time to accumulate gel, and the concentration of active compounds in them is significantly higher than in younger inner leaves. Once you cut one, stand it upright in a cup for about 10 minutes before doing anything else. This allows the yellowish liquid near the outer skin, a compound called aloe, to drain out completely. You want to avoid aloe in your rooting water because it can cause mild irritation in sensitive plant species. After that, scrape out the pure clear gel and blend it with a small amount of warm water until you have a slightly cloudy liquid. That is your rooting solution. Fresh gel stays potent at room temperature for about 24 hours, up to 7 days in the refrigerator, and nearly 2 weeks if you add a few drops of pure vitamin E oil to the mix. One advanced technique I picked up during my nursery years is pressing the cut end of a cutting directly into the fleshy part of a thick aloe leaf and planting the whole thing together into moist soil. The gel continuously releases its hormones directly into the stem as the cutting establishes. This works exceptionally well with succulents and woody herbs like rosemary and thyme, where soil propagation tends to outperform water rooting in the long run. Now I want to tell you about something even older, something gardeners have been using since before rooting powder existed, since before garden centers existed, since the time of the ancient Romans. It is called willow water, and in my professional opinion, it is the single most powerful natural rooting stimulant available to the home gardener. Young, flexible green willow tips from this season's new growth are packed with 2 naturally occurring hormones. The first is salicylic acid, which you already know. The second is indole 3-butyric acid, or IBA, the exact same compound that commercial rooting powders synthetically replicate in a laboratory. The difference is that in willow water, IBA is delivered in a natural, slow-release form that the plant absorbs gradually and safely. without any risk of chemical burn. To make it, collect 2 generous handfuls of young willow tips, cut them into pieces about 1 inch long, and steep them in 4 cups of boiling water, just like brewing a strong herbal tea. Let the whole thing cool and rest for 8 to 12 hours. Do not go beyond 12 hours, because longer steeping increases tannin concentration, which can begin to inhibit the beneficial microbial activity you want to preserve. Strain out the branches, and what remains is a brownish liquid that experienced propagators call liquid gold, for very good reason. Now, what if you do not have a willow tree anywhere near you? The answer is sitting in most American medicine cabinets right now. A single 325 mg uncoated aspirin tablet, crushed and dissolved in 1 liter of water, delivers a dose of salicylate that closely approximates the active benefit of willow water. My friend Bob, who is 72 and lives in the Arizona desert where willow trees are about as common as snowfall, used aspirin water last fall to successfully root 40 rose cuttings in a single season. 40 cuttings, from 1 bottle of aspirin that cost him less than $3. So now you have your 3 natural rooting boosters ready to go. But before you drop a single cutting into a glass, I need to talk to you about something most gardening videos completely skip over, and it may be the most important factor of all: the water itself. Most people assume that if water looks clean and comes out of a tap, it is fine for their cuttings. But here is the part that changes everything. And I want you to pay close attention because this applies directly to where you live. Many cities across the United States no longer use chlorine to treat drinking water. They use something called chloramine instead. Cities like Chicago, Phoenix, Denver, and dozens of others have made this switch. Now, the old advice you may have heard, leave your water sitting out overnight and the chlorine will evaporate, that works perfectly well for chlorine. But chloramine does not evaporate. It does not matter how long you leave that glass sitting on the counter. The chloramine stays in the water and will stress your cuttings from the very first day. The fix is incredibly simple. Take 1 100 mg vitamin C tablet, the plain kind with no added flavors or coatings, and dissolve it in 1 liter of water. Wait just 5 minutes. That is all it takes to neutralize chloramine completely and make the water safe for even the most sensitive cuttings. To find out whether your city uses chlorine or chloramine, just visit your local water utilities website or give them a quick call. It takes 2 minutes, and it could be the reason everything changes for you. There is one more water factor worth addressing, and that is pH. Most cuttings root most efficiently in water, with a pH between 5.5 and 6.5, which is slightly acidic. The problem is that tap water across most of the United States runs between 7 and 8, which is on the alkaline side. A simple fix is to add just a few drops of raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar to your rooting water. This gently nudges the pH down into that ideal range while introducing trace amounts of beneficial organic acids. Now let us talk about oxygen, because this is easy to overlook and costly to ignore. When water sits completely still in a warm glass over several days, it gradually loses its dissolved oxygen content. Even though roots grow underwater, they need oxygen to function. Without it, those tender new root tips suffocate before they ever have a chance to develop. The solution is straightforward. Change your rooting water every 3 to 4 days, always using fresh water brought to room temperature first. Never use cold water straight from the tap, because a sudden temperature drop can send a developing cutting into shock and undo days of careful progress. When you rinse the glass, use hot water only, no soap of any kind, because even a tiny trace of dish detergent is toxic to developing roots. And if you want an extra layer of protection, drop a small piece of activated charcoal into the bottom of the glass. It acts as a natural filter, keeping the water cleaner between changes and suppressing harmful bacterial growth without affecting the beneficial biology you want to preserve. Temperature is one of the most underestimated variables in water propagation. The ideal water temperature for rooting sits between 72 and 79 degrees Fahrenheit, and the surrounding air temperature ideally stays between 75 and 85 degrees. This slight difference between root zone warmth and air temperature is a technique professional nurseries use deliberately. It is called bottom heat, and it encourages the cutting to prioritize root development over leaf growth, which is exactly what you want at this stage. You do not need any special equipment to achieve this at home. Simply place your glass on top of the refrigerator. Most people do not realize that the top of a refrigerator runs anywhere from 5 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the rest of the room, because of the heat released by the compressor below. It is a completely free source of gentle, consistent bottom heat that works around the clock. And finally, let us address light, because the instinct most gardeners follow here is actually working against them. A cutting without roots cannot move water up from below fast enough to replace what the leaves are losing through evaporation in direct sun. The result is a cutting that wilts and dies of dehydration while sitting in a full glass of water. What you actually want is bright, indirect light. A spot near an east-facing window, or set back 2 to 3 feet from a south-facing window, gives the cutting just enough light to stay alive and signal growth without pushing it into water stress. We have covered the ingredients and the environment. Now I want to give you what I consider the most undervalued part of this entire process, the technique that happens before the cutting ever touches water. Because even the best rooting solution in the world cannot compensate for a cutting that was prepared incorrectly from the start. The first rule is the angle of your cut. Always use a clean, sharp blade wiped down with rubbing alcohol before you begin. Make your cut at a 45-degree angle rather than straight across. That angle matters for 2 reasons. It dramatically increases the surface area in contact with your rooting solution, and it prevents the stem from sitting flat on the bottom of the glass, which allows water to circulate freely around the wound and reduces decay buildup at the base. The second rule, and this one is non-negotiable, always make your cut just below a leaf node. That small thickening on the stem where a leaf attaches is where the plant concentrates its most actively dividing cells. It is essentially the stem cell hub of the plant. If you cut in the middle of a smooth section of stem with no node nearby, roots will struggle to form no matter what you put in the water. Find the node, cut just below it, and carefully remove any leaves that would sit below the waterline. Submerged leaves rot quickly and introduce exactly the kind of bacterial load you have been working to avoid. Keep 2 to 3 healthy leaves at the top, and if any are exceptionally large, like on a monstera or tropical philodendron, cut them in half. It looks unusual, but it reduces evaporation demand nearly in half, and that can be the difference between a cutting that survives and one that wilts within a week. Now here is the technique I promised you earlier, the one that 95% of gardening videos never mention. It is called wounding, or scarification, and it is standard practice at every serious commercial nursery I have ever worked in or visited. After you make your 45-degree cut, take your clean blade and make 2 shallow vertical scores along opposite sides of the stem, starting just above the main cut and running about 1 inch upward. You only need to barely break through the outer layer to expose the pale green cambium tissue underneath. What this does is multiply the surface area available for hormone absorption by 3 to 4 times, and it triggers the plant's wound response in multiple locations simultaneously, accelerating callus formation and root initiation significantly. This technique is especially valuable for plants that are notoriously slow to root, including gardenia, Dracaena, and finicky rose varieties that seem to resist every other method. Let me give you a quick, honest framework for what to expect from different plants, because not everything roots at the same pace or with the same level of effort. The easiest group includes pothos, philodendron, coleus, and fresh mint. These root in plain water within 5 to 10 days, with almost no intervention, forgiving and fast, perfect for building confidence if you are newer to propagation. The middle group, which includes roses, hydrangeas, and pepper plants, benefits noticeably from raw honey or aloe vera gel and needs stable temperatures to perform well. Then there is the challenging group, plants like gardenia, magnolia, and Japanese maple, which require the full combination of willow water or aspirin water, the wounding technique, consistent bottom heat, and daily misting to keep leaves from drying out while roots slowly form. These are the ones that reward patience and precision. Now, even with everything done right, sometimes a cutting begins to show signs of rot. Do not give up immediately. Remove it from the water, rinse it gently, and cut back the stem with a clean blade until you reach tissue that is fully healthy, firm, and light green inside. Then add just a few drops of 3% hydrogen peroxide to a fresh glass of water and place the cutting back in. Hydrogen peroxide does two things simultaneously. It eliminates remaining bacteria on contact, and as it breaks down naturally in the water, it releases pure oxygen directly into the rooting environment. That oxygen boost is often exactly what a struggling cutting needs to recover and begin again. And now let me bring everything together, because the most important thing you can take away from today is not just a list of ingredients or steps. It is a way of thinking. Raw honey, aloe vera gel, willow water, and for those without a willow nearby, aspirin water. These are not shortcuts or tricks. They are tools that work because they are aligned with what plants have always needed. Pair them with a clean 45-degree cut just below the leaf node, the right water temperature, light that supports without stressing, a regular water change schedule, and when needed, the wounding technique for more resistant varieties, and you will have a propagation system that genuinely rivals what professional growers use every single day. Nature figured out the solutions to its own problems long before we came along. Our job as gardeners is simply to learn how to work with it rather than against it. And when we do that, the results have a way of feeling almost magical, even when the science behind them is beautifully straightforward. If today's video gave you something useful, something you will actually try in your own garden, I would love for you to share it with a fellow gardener in your life. Leave a comment below telling me which method you are most excited to try first. And if you have not subscribed to Roots and Garden Secrets yet, now is a great time to do that. We are here every week, sharing the real knowledge that turns a good gardener into a great one. I will see you in the next one.